Today's topic is background. We've already talked about it in our theoretical part of this course, but now let's see how to set up a correct background in Corona and in Vray. Plus, we'll cover the most frequent mistakes made by visualizers during background setup. And so the first part of this lesson will apply to both Corona and Vray. As for the practical part, well, it differs slightly, although the general rules for background setup are identical for both Corona and Vray. Okay, so let's get started without further ado. Look closely at these references. In each of these images, the background is very much highlighted. As I've said earlier, exterior background, or the environment, is the main light source that illuminates an interior. So most of the time, the background will be very bright and highlighted. Look at these images. The background is very white and bright. So you should always keep that in mind. There can be exceptions, even though the background can be a little bit darker. So for example, the windows are on the shaded sides of the house, or if there are objects that come too close to the window. It can be a facade or of a building, or it could be a group of trees. In those cases, the background can be a little darker. But anyway, as a general rule, you should stick with the reference. You should find a photo of an interior that looks like yours, and you should just try to copy it. So this is a good way to play it safe and avoid many mistakes. Okay, now let's break down the most common mistakes that visualizers tend to make when setting up background in their interiors. Mistake number one has to do with a distorted perspective. It can happen among other reasons because the photo was taken with had a wide angle lens, or when the photographer was slightly tilting downwards, causing the camera to look from the top down. So this is when vertical lines start to diverge as they go upwards, like in this photo. So this is a wrong perspective. The perspective lines in your interior and in your background must coincide, or at least there shouldn't be any strong divergence between them. If your interior has objects with vertical lines and you add a background image with an incorrect perspective, you'll see that the lines of the buildings outside are not parallel to one another. It's a super frequent mistake that I'm seeing all the time, so make sure you avoid it. So the solution here would be to replace the background and find a new image with vertical lines that don't diverge from one another, like in this example. Now, the next mistake on our list is an incorrect horizon line. We're going to see that during the practical part, but in short, the horizon line in the camera, the horizon line in your background, and all perspective lines must meet in one point on the horizon. If you follow this rule, you'll never end up with a distorted perspective. It's not uncommon that the background is put too high or too low, causing the perspective to look broken or distorted, and as a result, you get a sensation that there's something wrong with the render. So the next mistake is a low resolution of a background image. And you can easily avoid that by picking high resolution images. Otherwise, your background will be packed with pixels and artifacts. So finding an image with the right resolution is not always easy, but you should definitely make an effort. So choose a background with at least 3,000 or 4,000 pixels on the long side. If you manage to find an image with an even higher resolution, good. So another recurring mistake is an oversaturated background. That's when your photo is too contrasting, like this image, for example. See? It has some very dark areas. In that case, you'll end up with a dark spot in your background, and you won't be able to correct that in any way. So the only thing you can do at this point is to shift the background so that these dark areas don't end up in your render. Otherwise, it will spoil your entire project. So I recommend you that you replace a background of that kind with a better one. So if we're talking about HDRI map with a high dynamic range, its pixels contain halftones, and in that case you'll be able to correct the brightness of such a map. But photos usually don't have a high dynamic range, so the only solution here is to find a new background. And here also we have black facades and very dark areas. And if you think you can correct this image by increasing its brightness, you're wrong. But you can try doing that in Photoshop yourself, that's for sure. Alright, and so the final mistake I'd like to draw your attention to is mismatched lighting. So, suppose you have a background with a bright sunny lighting. The sun is shining from the right side, and your interior has scattered overcast lighting. So, as a result, you end up with a mismatched lighting. So, and another reason why lighting may look mismatched is when the background has too bright, too saturated colors. In that case, I recommend you decrease saturation of your map, of your texture. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. All right. Now let's proceed to the practical part of our lesson. So today we're gonna set up background and Corona, and here is the same living room scene that we've used before. We have a neutral scattered light here. And the first thing we need to do is to find a proper texture, the right map for our future background. Like this one, for example. The one thing I don't like about this texture is that it has dark areas. So I'm looking for a more neutral kind of background. This image is pretty bright. It has green trees, blue sky, things like that. We can correct its brightness by desaturating the texture. Now you may come across another problem though, when a wide panoramic background is missing a part at the front or a part of the sky. In that case, you'll need the latest version of Photoshop, which has a very useful AI tool actually. And this tool can add missing parts to an image. So this neural network is called Adobe Firefly. It can generate missing parts of your background image. So we'll take a look at how it works later. For now, let's focus at what we have here. So I'll go back to 3D Max, and we need to create a plane outside the window. So there are two ways to do that. The first one is to simply create a plane, and the second one is to create a cylinder or a semi-cylinder. So when to create which? If you know exactly how many cameras you have in your interior and where they are put, it's better to create a plane. But if, however, you don't know how many cameras you'll end up having, if you're constantly looking for a better view, then it makes more sense to use a cylinder-shaped background. All right? Now here's another important thing. The background must always be perpendicular to the camera. So let's create a plane, and it's going to be a standard plane. We'll put it outside the window. Now pay attention how the light changed instantly. Well, that's because we have the sun in our scene, and the plane is blocking out the sunlight. So we need to exclude the plane from the light. And that's why right after you create a plane, you need to disable its shadows. To do that, you go to Object Properties of the plane, and you go ahead and disable Cast Shadows. Let's disable Receive Shadows as well, just in case. All right. See, now the light is back to normal. So next, we need to set the size of our plane. Let's find out the resolution of the background image. So our panoramic image is 5,398 by 1,723. And you can memorize these parameters or note them down. We're going to use them for our plane. So the width is 5398 and the length is 1723. And so this is our background. You can scale it down if you want. The main thing here is that we have the right width to length ratio. Okay? So next we need to set up the material. So we press M on the keyboard to open Material Editor. And we create a Corona Light MTL. And then we find our background texture and drag and drop it to 3ds Max. And what we do next is we link the texture to the color slot. And then assign the material to the plane. In the viewport window, we see that the background has turned white. So to achieve the correct background display, we need to pick black as the emission color. Now that doesn't affect anything in the scene, except that now we can see a proper background in the viewport. So here in the camera view, for example, we switch to the default shading mode, and now we can put the background in the camera view. So we click select camera, and whether you're using a physical camera or a Corona camera or a V-Ray camera for that matter, so each of them has an option that's called horizon line. So what you should do is you should enable this option. And now if I press F3, we can see a black line, and it's that horizon line. So that's going to help us put the background. So the horizon line in the camera and horizon line in the background image must coincide, like I said. So here in the horizon line is partly blocked by the mountains. So we'll have to use our imagination to figure out where the horizon line might lie. Now don't worry if you miss a few pixels, that's okay. If the lines don't coincide perfectly, that's fine. At least make sure they lie very close to one another. So let's move the background a bit further away. This is how we can adjust the perspective and the background. All right. Now let's go back to the problem that I've mentioned earlier. So what do we do if there's a part of the background that's missing? So suppose the background is at the right distance from the window, but here at the top we have a gap. See? But luckily, Photoshop has a special artificial intelligence model that can generate missing parts of an image, whether it's the top, the bottom, right or left. So let's move the background a bit closer. And suppose we don't have any missing parts here. Let's see what's happening in the interactive render. Well, not much actually, so we need to edit the material in a way that it looks good. And at this point, the first thing we need to disable is this emit light option. That's because the background is a source of light in itself, and you may spend forever trying to figure out what's wrong with it, why you have excessive noise in your scene. So it's the background that's creating noise because it's acting as a light source. We can actually go to render settings and turn off all the lights. See? And you can see that the scene is still illuminated, but we don't see any background yet. But that's because we need to exclude the background from the override option. We're using a clay material as the override material, and the background has turned gray too. So what we do is we simply select the background and click this plus icon to exclude it from the override option. And voila, the background is finally here. So next we need to adjust the brightness, just like in the reference. Always use references. I keep saying it, but it's very important that you use references. So suppose we need to achieve the effect like in this image. So for that, we'll go back to Material Editor, we'll disable Emit Light, and we'll set up brightness. We'll increase intensity to 5. The background has turned wider, obviously. Now let's move it until we find the best position. Another good thing about this background setup method is that, well, the thing is, the background creates slight reflections. And if you have reflective materials in your scene, that will make the scene look more realistic. Okay, so that's done. Now let's see how we can correct the background that's too bright or too saturated. So we need to add a correction layer between the texture and the material. It can be Corona color correct or the standard color correct. Doesn't matter. So let's take Corona color correct and add it in between. And in its settings, you simply decrease saturation to minus 0.5. And the saturation has almost gone. Let's make it minus 0.3 actually. Just a slight correction. And now let's go back to natural lighting. The background's working properly. And also we can adjust the gamma value. And in case you want to add a blue shade to your background, you can change the hue value as well. So let's readjust the intensity of our light material. We'll make it 3. Don't forget to check with the reference. Well, I can see that the window frames are brighter than the background itself, and that's not right. So let's increase intensity to the point when the window frames and the background almost blend with one another. Now we might need to make the sun less bright in a way that the background and the window frames are illuminated more or less in the same way. Like this. Okay, now let's see a couple of more common mistakes that visualizers tend to make. So, suppose you have reflective objects in your scene. And it can be the floor, the walls, or the ceiling. And it can happen that they may lack reflections. In that case, we need to add fake lights. We're going to talk about fake lights in a separate video. For now, our background is set, and now you know how it all works. Now, there's one thing we should do. We should make a cylinder-shaped background. So let's create one. So we simply add a cylinder object to our scene. And we create it from the center of the room. And then we set its height. And we'll put it in the way that it covers the entire interior. We'll reduce a number of segments to make it more visually clean. So I'll reduce it to 1. The number of sides doesn't really matter. So we can make it 12 or 8. 8 is too few, I guess. So the main thing is that each camera in your scene is perpendicular to the background. The background should never be at an angle to the camera. So we'll increase the number of sides to 16. So the render has turned completely black. That's because we're inside the cylinder. and we need to edit it. So we convert it to editable poly, remove 2 polygons, the top one and the bottom one. And what we should do now is we should flip all the remaining polygons inside out, because we need the background to be shining inwards. We select the polygons and click the flip button. We need the light in our scene back. So we do a right mouse click on the background, click properties and disable cast shadows and receive shadows just in case. The light is back. We need to go to the render settings and exclude the background from the override command. It's turned greenish kind of, as you can see. And so now we can assign the material to the background. And all there's left to do now is to do the mapping. So you can do this using either unwrap or UVW map. And we'll use UVW map because it's easier. So we switch to the cylindrical shape, adjust the U tile parameter to set up the tiling, the repeating pattern of the background. And let's see how it looks. In the camera view, well, it's necessary, if necessary, you can rotate the cylinder along its axis until you're happy with the view outside the window. So it's up to you. So it looks like that's all about background setup in Corona. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll definitely see you in the next one. Bye. Okay, let's try to set up lighting in Corona in practice. To do this, I've picked this reference, and we'll try to create the same lighting in our scene, just like in this image. So we have this dining area as the main room, and we're going to use Rava Fake because it's the most flexible lighting setup method. I don't think this tutorial is going to be too long. Also, I'd like to use this scene to work with fakes. So if you want to learn more about fakes and understand how to customize and enhance the image, you can go to the tutorial section right after this lesson. So let's get started. I'll start by opening up the render settings and checking MTL override checkbox. I won't dwell on some of the actions since we've already talked about them previously. If you happen to forget something, please go back to the previous videos and check them out. So for now, I'll just tell you what I'm gonna do. I'll click Corona Physical MTL, and then I'm gonna select Single Map, 3ds Max Settings, doesn't really matter. Personally, I'm used to working with Single Map. Then I click None, select Corona Sky in the Corona section, and open up Material Editor and drag and drop this base material in there. I mean this orb that we have in Override. And then I drag and drop Corona Sky. In the method box, select Instance, choose Raw Fake mode in the Corona Sky model, and set it to black. Affected by Sky checkbox is unchecked for now. Next I need to set the direction of light. To do this, I'll go to the light source section, select Corona, and then I select Corona Sun and point it inside the room. I think it's best to choose the lighting source direction at an angle relative to the camera. In this scene, the camera is in this corner and it's pointing at the opposite corner. So I need to keep some kind of angle between the two. If we put the light like this, the sun will literally shine in our eyes and we won't have good shadows and all the objects will look flat. Not so much overexposed, but rather they'll be darkened and that will look bad. So that's more of a lighting theory thing. But anyways, it would be better to direct lighting to the opposite wall, to the opposite corner, so that the light channels either through the center of the window or through its upper edge. Like maybe here. We'll talk about chiaroscuro a bit later. target can be directed into the center of the room and into the corner. The sun is just a vector, so it doesn't really matter. We'll adjust all of this a little later anyway. So I've put the sun, and now I need to find the sun's light and shadow pattern without actually working with the sky yet. Now, as I've said before, you can approach this in two ways. You can do the sun positioning first and then find the light and shade pattern, or you can set up the sky, make a good image, and then create a pattern with the sun. It's up to you. I'm going to do the light and shade pattern first. So I'll go to Corona viewport. In the render setup window, I make sure that the right view is fixed. So Corona camera is here. And now I'll click the Start Interactive button, and everything should go black. That's right, render has gone black, and now we can see anything. Okay, so we've got some light mix here. I think I'm gonna remove all of this for now, and I'll remove all the render elements. Now let's reset the render. If you've done everything right, the color should be black. And we should start there, because if you have any additional light sources you may have accidentally added with the models, it's easy to spot it at this point and then not waste a lot of time looking for all sorts of bugs like noise, overexposure, and things like that. Okay, let's move on. We have some windows on the scene with material setup. So now I'm gonna click Scene tab, click Preserve button, and simply check the Preserve Glass Material checkbox. So as you can see, the light is now coming through the glass. That's good. Next we go to Performance section, uncheck Fast Preview Denoise so that we don't have this blurring effect. And now the sunlight is right inside the interior. We can leave the brightness as it is for now. It's not really a big deal right now. And now I'm gonna work a little bit with the sun to create a light and shadow pattern. In this case, we can see that there's a table, chairs in the foreground, and they block out the lighting. So I can adjust the light like I normally do so that the sun comes right through to the room. In this case, it will look ugly. You see all the light falls on the table, and there's hardly any lighting on the floor, and it doesn't look good. So a good idea here is to put the sun behind the table to get a nice sun pattern on the wall. So let's try to do that. And you can try placing it lower at a certain angle, or you can try bringing the lighting closer. And I think we should do exactly that, because in this case, they're nice shadows from the chairs. The only thing I'd like to fix is the sunlight thing. Right now it looks very bright and sharp. So I'm gonna lower and soften it up a bit. Let's set intensity value to 0.1. And now we're gonna increase the size value. Let's make it 8, for example. You can see now that the shadows are softer, and that looks cool. You can increase or decrease it as you please, depending on what effect you want. You can adjust, you can just create a mild, subtle sunlight, and then you have an overcast neutral lighting. In this case, it already looks good, so I'll leave it that way for now. I'm gonna turn it off, and we're gonna move on to setting up the sky. Okay, so first things first, I'm gonna go to Material Editor, and here is the sky. And the first thing I want to do is work with zenith light, which is the topmost lighting, to get the blue hue on the floor. So I click on zenith color. I use Corona color picker tool because it has a pretty handy temperature scale, so I can set up sky according to temperature and make it look brighter. We'll get a pretty dark picture, so you can just increase exposure value for now. I'm gonna set it to 3. You can see it's a little bit brighter now. Next we need to work with the light on the ceiling. I'm gonna go to ground color and I'm gonna choose neutral gray. And this is the light we've got. And we can compare it to the light on the reference. There's no such beam here because the direction of the light is mostly coming from the sun. In this case, I want to make the sun brighter so that it looks a bit fresher, kind of. Because as I said, the table on our scene blocks everything, so it's unlikely that we be able to copy this picture perfectly. But it will be a great point of reference for some shades or highlights. So now let's decrease value for a ground color a little bit. We might have a problem with this corner here in the future because it's quite dark here, but we'll fix that with fakes. And I think we need to increase saturation of zenith color a little bit more. And by the way, you can also use two suns, but I'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, so we're done with the ceiling and the floor, and now we need to make the light come right through the interior horizon color. So we can put either gray or purple white. That depends on the structure of the room. If the room is kind of elongated and deep, then we need to put a higher value so that more light comes through the window. So let's do it like this, for example. Now both the top and the middle of the horizon slightly interrupt the zenith, making it a little less blue. And next we're going to move on to the background. It's already here. It's already set. So I'll just add it to the object excluded column and MTL override by clicking on this plus button here. It's already set up and there's some amount of brightness, so that's fine. And now let's go ahead and turn on the sun by checking this checkbox. And now we have a backlight and the whole scene is overexposed. It becomes very warm. To fix this, we can turn on direct input. When that's active, the color of the sun doesn't change. We can also lower the intensity value to 0.5. Here we go. Basically, this now looks like the reference. The only difference is that the floor in our scene is not sunlit because of the table here. But the settings and the sunlight are pretty much similar. We can also double the size of the sun to make the picture even more similar to what we have in the reference. But in that case, the shadows from the furniture are missing. So I'll put a value of 12, and that's basically enough to keep the soft shadows. Basically that's it. That's the quickest lighting setup. And so now, getting a little bit ahead of myself, I want to say that this result is far from perfect. There are a number of problems here. Let me show you some of them. If I uncheck MTL override, we have dark areas, dark spots, because there are dark materials in the scene and the image becomes noticeably contrasty, kind of. You can see there's a pretty dark corner there. It looks kind of messy, and we're gonna need to fix that. The plan is also kind of dark because it's made of dark material and it's facing the window, which makes it overly shaded. And of course the table legs, they look like some kind of black square. It's not very nice. We'll have to fix that. For example, the way photographers fix it is that they make a bunch of images by highlighting different areas. We're going to work with that too, and we're going to customize the fakes in our own time. And that's it for today. We'll see you in the next lesson. So let's talk about lighting setup in V-Ray. Today we're going to set up neutral daylight, something like this. The only thing is that the chandelier on our scene will not work, but nevertheless we'll try to achieve the same effect. And we're going to try to do it as quickly as possible. I already have the scene prepared and the background set. I have V-Ray light override active. I've excluded the glass. So it looks like we can start. So it's the same scene, the same living room that I was working on in Corona. Now let's switch to top view. You see I've got camera view blocked. And now, first of all, let's create light sources. We're going to choose V-Ray light. And I'm going to put it somewhere outside of the scene. Then select dome type. And one more thing about V-Ray dome. In the current versions of V-Ray 6, there are no portals. So the best way is to use V-Ray dome. In that case, you definitely need to enable adaptive dome mode. Then it'll work roughly the same way as portals. So I've got V-Ray dome set up. Next, I'm gonna put V-Ray sky on its map. Select it under V-Ray sky, drag and drop, and connect it on the light source. In the map slot, and then select instance. Then we need to check specify sun node box, because we're gonna control the light source with the sun. And next, to add the sun itself, I'm gonna click V-Ray sun. And we need to point it inside the interior so that there's an angle between the camera and the sun. In this case, notification pops up saying, would you like to automatically add V-Ray sky environment map? It's pretty much useless at the moment, so we'll decline. And now I'm gonna set up the sun in a way that it's at an angle. Obviously I needed to get through the window, the center of the window, or the top slope. I pointed either to the center of the room or to the far corner. So let's point the target to the far corner. And now we have to kind of coordinate the sun and the sky. So I can turn off the sun for now. To do that, I uncheck enable. And now the only light source we have on the scene is V-Ray dome. So you see we have some lighting on the ceiling and the floor. Well, now let's work with the sky then. So first of all, we need to set the sunlight. We'll click None button and set the sun. This is necessary for the sun vector pointing inside the interior to work correctly. Don't forget to link the sun to the sky if it's on the environment or in the V-Ray dome. Next, we need to set up sky model. And I'm gonna use PRG clear sky mode. You can see on the reference lighting is warm, so we'll compensate for that by using turbidity parameter. Let's set it to a higher value. We'll make it 10. And as you can see, now the cold shade is gone. And now we need to keep in mind that we'll need to work with the materials as well. And they are quite warm. There's parquet on the floor and the rug, that's quite warm shade. The reference also has a similar rug and wood flooring in a warm shade, and this means that this blue shade can be compensated for. So let's leave it like this for now. And now we need to tweak the exposure of our image. We can do that in two ways. We can change it in the V-Ray camera, and I'm going to click on select camera button. And now in exposure value mode, we can set it to 8, 9, 10, or 6, depending on what reference we have and what we want to get. Although in this case we have overexposed areas, as you can see. The light is fine here, and as you can see it's overexposed in this area. And we haven't turned on the sun yet. So we can compensate for this by using exposure parameter and frame buffer. Click here and we can see that highlight burn value is now at its maximum. So I'm just going to minimize it so that all of these overexposed areas disappear. And now the scene looks pretty decent. If you don't like the cold shade on the floor and you want to make it as neutral as possible, you can use the color correction map. So we select color correction from the list of maps, drag it over here, and connect it to V-Ray sky. Now let's turn down saturation value And don't forget that we need to insert color correct into the light source, into the V-Ray dome. Just drag it again and select instance. And now we have neutral lighting. A subtle coolness is still here, and that's good. Okay? So next we need to direct the sunbeam just like here. We need to direct it to the wall. So I turn on the sun by checking the enable checkbox. We get a square like this, but it's overexposed as you can see. So we need to reduce the intensity value, and we're gonna set it to 0.1. We can also select some part of the image separately, so we don't have to change the whole scene. Let's set it to 0.05. And now, as you can see, it looks much better. Let's go ahead and blur it. We'll set the size multiplier value to 12. And I think we can even reduce it further. Let's make it 8. And now we can adjust this light beam. For example, let's direct it deeper into the room. We'll set the sun a little lower. Now, if it's too red, we can change the color mode to override. And here, in override, we can set the value we want. So let's go like this. Now, sometimes the light from the sky is normal, but you want to direct the sunbeam in a different way. And in that case, we can use two suns. And of course, from a physical standpoint of view, this is, well, it's not quite right. But since we're artists, not scientists, we can do that. In that case, I can turn the sun off. Like, it creates a direction to the room. And for the light beam, I can just copy it. Let me show you here. Like this. It's now activated, and also I'm gonna increase the intensity value to show you how it works. See? There's sunlight on the floor now. I can direct it like this, for example, or I can direct it deeper into the room. So I regulate the sun pattern with another sun, basically. So I don't have to work with the sky and the fill light. The only thing that changes is the sun's beam. In some cases it's possible, but it's a fake. So if we need to achieve some specific result like the reference, well, why not? In that case, we can do it. Basically, with this method, we can get any kind of daylight in V-Ray. So there you have it. That's all for this lesson. We'll see you in the next one.